Keir Starmer's position is untenable. The Prime Minister is putting his own interest before the national interest. He has misled Parliament and he has misled the country on a matter of national security. A man who has tried to cling on to his job, whatever the cost. He is so blinded by faith in his own righteousness that he cannot see what everyone else in the country can see.
Keir Starmer is being mocked and politically obliterated as the Mandelson scandal explodes into a full-blown crisis, shaking Downing Street. What was meant to be a controlled government process has now turned into chaos, exposing serious questions about power, trust, and who is really in control. As pressure builds from every direction, this is quickly becoming one of the most damaging moments of his leadership.
Nothing is more serious. He is not fit to govern. For months, he has been telling the country a complete untruth. That Peter Mandelson's appointment as our ambassador was down to a failure of vetting.
But the very fact that the Foreign Office and a small number of other organisations have the right to overrule a recommendation from UK security vetting not to appoint someone to a sensitive post because of security concerns is quite frankly astonishing.
For me, the real issue here isn't just one appointment. It's how a security no didn't actually function as a final stop. Security vetting is supposed to be the last gate. If UK security vetting raises concerns, that should normally end the process. But in this case, it didn't. The Foreign Office had the authority to override that advice, and that's exactly what happened. The appointment still went ahead.
The Foreign Office had the right to overrule the recommendation put to it by UK security vetting not to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador.
That leads me straight to the uncomfortable question. If security says this isn't safe, who is actually deciding that it is?
Well, because the Prime Minister this morning either looks like a liar, which Kenny Badenoch is claiming, or at best incredibly incompetent.
What makes it more serious in my view is the lack of escalation. This wasn't automatically flagged to ministers or Downing Street. There was no built-in requirement to escalate the decision. So a sensitive appointment could move through internal channels without top-level awareness. To me, that isn't just a technical gap. It's a visibility problem at the center of government decision-making.
What the Prime Minister was referring to was the process that allowed the Foreign Office to overrule the recommendation put to them by UK security vetting to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States.
Peter Mandelson's name adds attention, but I don't see the real issue as personal. It's procedural. A failed security recommendation didn't act as a hard stop. It functioned more like advice that could simply be set aside. And once I see it that way, it stops looking like a one-off mistake and starts looking like a system that was never fully stress-tested until it broke publicly.
As I say, it's astonishing. It's completely unacceptable.
The breaking point, for me, came when the story reached The Guardian. That's when it stopped being an internal process issue and turned into a political crisis. Before that, even within government, there didn't seem to be a fully aligned understanding of what had actually happened.
So when I found out about this yesterday afternoon, I was out in Southampton campaigning with colleagues for the local elections when the Guardian story broke. I immediately came back to London, and what became very clear to me was this was not just an individual case in relation to Peter Mandelson.
Darren Jones only found out when the story broke while he was out campaigning. He didn't receive a briefing or controlled update first. He had to drop everything and return to London as the situation unfolded in public. That detail stands out to me because it shows how reactive everything became. It also makes one thing very clear in my mind. The government didn't control the story. It reacted to it. And once that happens, authority over the narrative is already weakened.
Why did he wait? Why a delay of almost 48 hours?
Because the information had not yet been fully assembled for him to be able to go to the House of Commons to make that statement.
The delay at the top added even more pressure. The Prime Minister was informed on Tuesday evening, but even then, clarity didn't come immediately. Officials needed time to piece together who made what decision when it happened, and how the override process was actually used.
As you know, he's going to be giving a statement to the House of Commons on Monday.
Why Monday? A matter of this gravity. Why does it take until Monday, Mr. Jones?
Purely because Parliament is not sitting today.
From the outside, that kind of delay might look procedural. But in politics, timing shapes perception. Any gap creates space for confusion, suspicion, and pressure to build. And that's why, for me, the reaction inside government became so intense. As more details emerged, it became clearer that this wasn't just about a single appointment slipping through. It was about a system that allowed major decisions to be made without proper escalation or full visibility at the top. That's the part I can't ignore.
Mandelson failed the vetting. And despite that, despite it being known that his appointment would pose a risk to national security, somehow he was appointed anyway. Someone pushed that appointment through.
Because if a security recommendation can be overridden without automatically triggering ministerial awareness, then the system isn't just flexible, it's fragmented. And honestly, this is the part that makes the whole situation feel bigger than just one appointment gone wrong. When I look at it closely, I don't just see a single mistake anymore. I see fragmentation inside the system, and that's exactly what turns it into a political storm. Because once that kind of gap exists, I start asking a much more uncomfortable question. How many other decisions might have already gone through the same hidden route without anyone really noticing?
The Prime Minister is now asking us to believe that no one in government thought to tell him or his team that Mandelson had failed vetting.
What was happening inside Downing Street? And the timeline starts to feel even more uncomfortable. The Prime Minister was only informed on Tuesday evening, and by that point, the issue wasn't quietly sitting inside the system anymore. It was already starting to spill into public view. What followed was basically a scramble to piece everything together: who made which decision, how the appointment moved forward, and how it reached that point despite security concerns. And that process didn't happen instantly. It took time to collect the full picture, and that delay of nearly 48 hours before a parliamentary statement only added more pressure. The government's explanation is that the documents weren't ready and needed to be properly assembled before anything could be said in Parliament. But from where I'm standing, that explanation still leaves an impression that leadership was reacting after the story broke, rather than controlling it from the start. That sense of delayed control becomes even more noticeable when I look at the fallout involving Sir Ollie Robbins. His exit overnight, described effectively as a dismissal after losing the confidence of both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, adds another layer of shock to the situation. He is not a minor figure in government. He has worked under multiple prime ministers and held some of the most senior roles in the system. So when someone like that leaves so suddenly, I can't help but question whether this is just about one individual's mistake.
As this scandal has unraveled, he has sought to pin the blame on everyone but himself. He has blamed the security services. He has sacked his chief of staff. He has sacked the cabinet secretary. He has now sacked Ollie Robbins, the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office.
And even after all of this, there is still something that remains unresolved for me. Even senior officials admit they don't fully have the vetting details in front of them, and the reasons behind the failed clearance remain locked behind security and legal restrictions. So I'm left with a situation where decisions are being explained and defended, but the most important underlying reasoning is still out of sight.
One of your senior colleagues, Dame Emily Thornberry, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, says that MPs' quotes have been kept in the dark. People need to stop messing us about and tell us the truth. How embarrassing is that for you and your government?
Now at this point, the political temperature is really starting to rise, and you can feel it most strongly in Parliament. MPs aren't just asking questions anymore. They're openly saying they were kept in the dark, and that phrase alone tells you everything about the mood. Senior Select Committee figures are accusing the government of not being fully transparent. And suddenly this isn't a quiet procedural issue, it's a trust issue playing out in real time.
All this from a man who once said, "I will carry the can for the mistakes of any organization I lead." The reality is, he is undermining the very fabric that underpins government. This, remember, is a Prime Minister who spent his entire time in opposition telling people that he was whiter than white, telling the country that the rules mattered, that standards mattered, that misleading Parliament mattered.
Opposition MPs start pushing harder, questioning whether the government's earlier statements in the House were actually complete or even fully accurate. And the government response stays very firm on paper. They insist due process was followed, but at the same time, they also admit the uncomfortable truth that the override mechanism did exist. So you end up with this strange contradiction where the system was technically followed, but the people meant to oversee it weren't fully informed. And honestly, that's where Parliament starts to look visibly frustrated.
That this is a national disgrace. The buck stops with him, and the only decent response is to resign.
From there, the Prime Minister's defense becomes very focused on separating responsibility from process. The argument is that vetting and ethics checks were completed, just at different layers of the system. Officials are also very clear that the Prime Minister didn't receive the detailed vetting documents, because those aren't normally shared due to their sensitive nature. And I get the logic behind that, I really do. You can't expect a Prime Minister to go through raw intelligence files like it's bedtime reading. But politically, that argument doesn't fully land. Because in the public mind, responsibility always travels upward. No matter how many layers you add, the final accountability still sits at the top. And that tension between, I wasn't shown everything and you're still responsible, is exactly where the pressure starts to build.
The day before the Prime Minister said that Mandelson had had clearance because he was supposedly blissfully unaware, he was asked in the House of Commons by Kemi Badenoch, did the official security vetting that he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein? To which the Prime Minister replied, yes, it did. If so, why did he proceed?
Then things take another turn with what people are calling the document war. The humble address process forces the government to release official documents, and while some material has already been published, another tranche is still pending. And this is where things get even more sensitive, because these documents aren't just paperwork. They are going through legal checks and intelligence review before they can be released. There is even potential involvement from the Met Police and the Intelligence and Security Committee, which tells you how delicate this all is. But here's the real tension. Nobody knows what those remaining documents will actually show. And that uncertainty is doing more damage than answers right now. Because if what gets released doesn't match what's already been said, then the entire narrative could shift again overnight. But that leaves the core question hanging in the air. Is this simple incompetence, or is it a deeper failure of transparency built into the system itself?